Like the colors in the rainbow, so too are the gays of our lives. Hi, welcome to another fabulous edition of the Gays of Our Lives, where we have fun talking about what we do for fun. So today I'm here joined by two marvelous guests, but I'm going to let them introduce ourselves and then we'll jump into some conversation.
I'm Angel, and this is my partner Jamie, and we've been married for 5 years now.
They're being nice. Unbelievable. They are actually my former Mix MX LGBTQ Fall River and my current reigning Mix LGBTQ Fall River. So I wanted to ask you guys, why MX? What is that about?
So I don't know. I think that, I don't know. What do you think?
Don't jump at once. I know they're way too polite. I know it's weird for my TV show, but they're trying. So because you guys ran for this before, right? This is a position in our royal court. So tell me more what it means to be MX, or what that means to you guys.
I think having the position is all about being more inclusive to everyone, because not everyone specifically feels like they would fit into the Miss category or the Mister. So we have the third category, and
I think that gender is a lot more complicated than those two boxes that people try to fit you into, and it just feels better for some people to be that other, I guess.
No, absolutely. Right, so one of my big things was when we created the Royal Court, we wanted to make sure we were really inclusive. And on today's episode, I really wanted to kind of jump a little bit more into these whole concepts of what it means to be non-binary, what it means to be trans, what it means to use different kinds of pronouns. I feel like the LGBT community, we still have a lot of issues with this. Not necessarily within ourselves, I think we've grown a lot, but I think a lot of people don't quite get it yet. So what pronouns do you guys prefer and why?
I use he, they interchangeably.
I use they, them.
Why?
For me personally, I guess it depends on where I'm at in life specifically, because there are certain points where I may feel more comfortable with using she, they, or he, they, or one or the other, or just they, them. I prefer they, them because I feel like it doesn't have that restriction for me personally.
No, I love that. I think what people need to understand, and we've tried to touch upon it a little bit in other shows that I've done, the last two shows, but in this one, because I have this fabulous couple here to help me really kind of drive these points home, is that these are two different things, right? When we talk about being LGBT, right? There's the sexuality pillar and there's a gender identity pillar, right? So for instance, I've talked about my experience when I was called faggot when I was 6. It had nothing to do with my sexuality. I was 6, right? There was no sexuality, I was a first grader.
Yeah.
Right? So it had to do more with the fact that I was very effeminate. I paint my nails, I liked pink, right? I like traditionally what's considered girly things. And that's the gendered aspect that we're talking about here. So I think a lot of people can't unwrap their heads around the concept of biological sex, that you have to be male or female, right? And I think that we non-binary, we trans folks, I think we kind of break open those two boxes in ways that make people uncomfortable because it's unknown. But it's not really unknown. I mentioned this before, right? The first gender reassignment surgery was done in 1929, right? And that was over 100 years ago. And there was a lot of LGBT history before that. So I think what happens here a lot of the times is that people conflate sex and gender, right? And they're two very different things. What our biological sex is and what body parts we have, right, are not the same of who we love and who we create relationships with. I brought you guys in because I think you are a stunning example of breaking all the boxes in the most beautiful ways. So I want you to tell me a little bit about how you guys met. How did you guys come to be
Well, we both met pre-transition in high school. We started dating senior year. I had already been kind of questioning my gender a little bit, but because of where I was in life, like that had to be repressed. But I was like openly gay at the time. And I had a huge crush on this one right here.
Makes sense.
Me personally, I identified as pansexual, bisexual. I always knew that I wasn't specifically heterosexual. I just didn't really know that there were terms for it or anything. And my family was pretty accepting, like they didn't keep me away from things like that. So I didn't really think it was a bad thing, if that makes sense, or like something that was wrong or other necessarily, until I started to like go onto the internet or like interact with other people, and then it was more like, oh. But being with Angel was my first time in a queer relationship, and I feel like becoming more comfortable with my sexuality and maybe even becoming more involved in the queer community made me more comfortable with my gender identity and start to question it more, and made me a little bit more comfortable with expressing it, if that makes sense.
That makes a ton of sense. But of course, I'm going to ask more because I think there are still people who might not quite understand. So you say something like before transition. So what was transitioning like for you guys?
So Jamie came out as trans before me.
Yes.
Which everyone was like, really? I thought Angel was going to be the one to transition.
That was something we heard a lot.
Oh, good. So you're already put in boxes while you were having a queer relationship.
Yes.
Oh,
and
yeah.
still trying
Love
to
that,
figure
okay.
ourselves out.
Yeah, so I was really feminine growing up. I always liked dresses and dolls and everything I was supposed to like.
Same. Not for me, though.
And so I had always had these feelings, like questioning, but especially when I hit middle school and I started to go through puberty specifically, and my body started changing, and my hormones started changing, I started to feel really uncomfortable with myself. And I didn't know what it was. I'd never heard of trans people before at all. I didn't know that was something you could do or explore.
Wow.
So I just didn't know what it was, so I kind of put a pin in it and let it in the back of my mind. And then again, when we started dating, I started to think about that more, and then I actually met trans people, became friends with them, and I was like, oh, so this is something that I can do, I can explore, I can look into. So when I was 18, I set up an appointment with a gender specialist in Providence, and then I started testosterone.
Nice.
Yeah. And then I was on testosterone for a little bit. There's a lot of backlash from everybody that I knew, family, non-family, friends.
What was that backlash?
A lot of people, I feel like there were people already that weren't okay with me being queer or in a queer, like a gay relationship. But there were even more people that were like, whoa, okay, gay is one thing, but this is a whole nother thing. That's wrong. You can't change your body, blah, blah, blah. So that kind of pushed me back into the closet, and I stopped after a month taking testosterone, and I was like, you know what, it's easier just to be how I was before. People didn't judge me as much, kind of thing. So then after that, sorry.
Don't apologize, you're doing amazing. I love hearing your story.
Thank you. After that, a couple months later, I just had, I don't want to say a mental breakdown, but I was working at this job. It was kind of like I guess like a dead end job, like it wasn't gonna go anywhere. I kind of felt really trapped, and Trump was actually elected into office, and it just like, it kind of was like the straw that broke. And I was like, you know, like, what am I doing with my life? Like, I don't want to be uncomfortable all the time. I want to live for me. I don't want to make anybody else comfortable. Like, in that way. Yeah. So then I went back on testosterone, and I had my chest surgery done. I had a double mastectomy, and that was about 6 months on testosterone, and then I stayed on it for about 2 or 3 years, and then I actually went to cosmetology school, and it was my first time really being, I guess, involved with people besides my family. I kind of went into hiding, and I guess like a caterpillar and a butterfly.
Yeah.
I know people use that a lot for trans people, but I kind of went into my cocoon and only interacted with people that I already knew, and I guess that was my way of protecting myself. But then I went to Rob Roy. That was my first time like identifying as a man and interacting with people that I didn't know, and they didn't know that I was trans, and they didn't know me, and honestly it was horrible. It was really strange, and people were even, I feel like people were rougher because they thought I was a gay man specifically.
That confluence of our sexuality and gender identity.
Yep. And because I was with Angel, and Angel was also identifying as a trans man at the time, and so yeah, people were nasty. It kind of made me push myself back to the other side again, I guess. Yeah. It scared me. And so I got off of testosterone. I started to present more feminine, and I guess I basically started to like detransition. And that went on for a good while, up until recently, honestly. And now I have been back on testosterone for like since April. So a few months, like 4 months. And I'm starting to realize that not everything is one way or another, and I am more comfortable being multiple things at once.
I mean, you just came on my TV show and to tell a whole story about it, and I love that. But if I could highlight a couple of things here about your story. One is that, first of all, none of us non-binary trans folks are going under the knife at 10, 11, 12. That is not a thing. It's not legal. So a lot of these stories that you hear that are like, oh, well, you know, they did this at 11, it's irreversible and all these things, none of that's true. The only thing that trans youth can actually access are called puberty blockers, which are reversible. So that's the first thing, right? Most of Jamie's transition stories happen post-18, right? But we started to feel and we start to understand these things younger. And that's why things like drag queen story time matter. This is why things like, you know, teaching diversity and understanding the differences between our gender identity and sexuality matters. That does not mean we're teaching porn to kindergartners. That is to say that by the time we're hitting puberty, we're starting to figure out who we are and who we want to be. And that is a journey for everybody. Right? That's not just something that us trans and non-binary people go through. It's a series of events that are just part of our development, right? And then the other thing that I want to hit on too is, because it was the same with me, I figured if I was more masculine and I could just be a gay man, then that would be fine, right? Because I could please or placate other people and make them more comfortable. So if I made other people more comfortable, then I could be more comfortable with myself. But as I found out, that's a losing battle. Right? That is an absolute losing battle. And all us LGBT people want to be able to do are live authentically as ourselves, right? Because like you guys having a family or being married, that's not lewd, right? To tell kids that, hey, you know, these guys, you know, they're married, right? Angel and Jamie are married and they're in love. That's it. right? It doesn't have to be this crazy, this is, how we have sex and all of these things that you hear,
Yeah.
right? So that's why I wanted to give you guys some time and some space to help me tell our stories about this, because I think the more we can tell our stories about this, the more people out there can relate, the more that we can kind of create our own communities and kind of push back against all of this kind of blowback that I think the LGBT culture has gotten, because we're more visible now than we've ever been. So I don't want to be remiss to hear Angel's side of your story, because I think you had a slightly different experience with all of this too. So you want to kind of tell me about how it was for you?
So for me, growing up in my family, being queer was not even like talked about at all. So I've had very little exposure, but it was clear from before puberty that I was like a very like masculine individual. And I remember being like 10, and I feel like that was like my peak masculinity as a kid, because it wasn't even like I didn't know anything about being trans, but I liked being perceived as a boy. Like that's just what felt right. But then, like it didn't really go anywhere for a while, and then I didn't get exposed to the idea of being trans until high school. Tumblr.com, introduced me to a lot.
Although that's not where being trans came from, because I have heard that.
No. And there's
like, oh, it's a Tumblr fad. I'm like, no, it just let people learn.
Yes.
It was around long before that, too.
It's not the best resource
It's
either.
not. It sure isn't, because a lot of stuff there is not great.
Yeah. But that was like my introduction. And like I was like exposed to the ideas of being like a demi boy or a demi girl, and I still
what is that?
I still don't really understand personally. It kind of like that's when I was just first like questioning my gender and like considering like changing my name, but like obviously that wasn't anything I was going to be able to do until I was like on my own. So then we started dating, and we were living together. Jamie came out, and then, that kind of was like my little push to be like, well, what am I doing with my life? Not saying that just because they came out as trans that I have to be trans as well, but if I already had those like feelings before. So I came out a year later, February 2017, and I started, I did my name change, I started testosterone, all at the same time. I never had never officially came out. I kind of just changed all my information on social media, and that was that. It wasn't until over the pandemic that I started questioning my gender again. And I feel like that's because presenting myself as a man, Jamie went to cosmetology school, I went to barber school, so that was being perceived as a gay man in a completely different environment, still negative.
Absolutely.
So, but my response was to try really hard to fit into that toxic masculine environment. And I didn't make the best of friends and wasn't making the best of choices for myself. So over the pandemic, I had that time to myself, and actually had more exposure to non-binary people and even butch people, people who identify as lesbians but don't necessarily present traditionally feminine. And I feel I realized that I had a lot of resentment towards people like that, and I used to always just be like, well, why can't they just accept that they're trans, Yeah. But I realized, it's so much more complicated, and I was like, the reason why this is bothering me so much is that this is me, and I'm repressing that for other people, and I feel that's part of the big issue, is I've spent my entire life trying to shape myself to my environment where I should just be able to exist where I am and the people that I'm around. I was never hurting anyone, just existing. So that's when I came out as non-binary, and as I still do identify as a trans man. It's not it's fluid in a way, because I still feel that connection to like the butch identity. And I feel like that's been very like freeing and like kind of a spiritual experience.
I think, so to kind of sum up some of your fabulous points here, I think people need to understand that a transition is not just a one and done, right? We are constantly transitioning within our lives, our bodies, how we want to present, right? You know, people give a lot of flack to trans people for changing their bodies, but people do plastic surgery all the time, right? You want to change your nose, you want to change your face, you want to change your breasts, you want to change things. You do body sculpting, you can do Botox. There's all those kind of things that we do to constantly find the best and most authentic version of ourselves, right? And I think people also need to understand this concept of what it means to be cisgender, right? Which means, like, I know very feminine gay men who are still cisgender, right? They still identify with their male and masculinity parts, right? And I know women who are very, very masculine, butch lesbians who are still cisgender because they still identify with their own body and their own body parts. I think people need to take kind of a chill pill when it comes to trying to understand everything there is about being non-binary or being trans, because it's not a one and done.
It's all very personal.
It's very personal, right? And this is, again, this lesson I have always tried to teach for everyone out there. Someone like me, I put myself out there. Jamie and Angel are willing to put themselves out there and talk about this with you. Not everyone is, right? So just because you know a random trans person does not mean you can ask them what surgeries they've had, what hormones they're on, all of those kind of things, because those are deeply personal questions and they're in flux, right? We've learned, like, it's taken me a long time to kind of rest on non-binary, to kind of be the kind of gender queer, gender fluid person that I want to be, with bright pink hair and nails, but I kind of look like a boy because I didn't shave right now. You know what I mean? So there's all of these kind of things, these lessons, that is why I do the shows, why I'm kind of sharing the gaze of our lives. Because for the most part, we're just regular people experiencing regular things. Because lots of people, straight people, have crises in masculinity or a crisis in femininity, right? I do not think all masculinity is toxic off the bat. I do not think all femininity is not toxic, right? Because there'd be plenty of toxic femininity, there's plenty of regular masculinity. Those constructs in gender affect our very psychology, right? They affect our spirituality. They affect so much of us that I wish more people would take the time to understand, to watch a video like this maybe, to understand what it means to be trans in real life. Not the stories you hear, not the fear-mongering that I think is really painfully common right now with, you know, that we're trying to attack kids and all of this stuff. All we're trying to do is make sure that us queer adults have those supports that we needed when we were queer kids, right? Because you said peak of masculinity for you was 10. For me, it was around 12, right? And you said you started to have this middle school, right? But now you're a total badass wearing earrings to kind of talk about testosterone, to talk about being trans, to talk about being non-binary with your loving partner. You guys are one of the most beautiful, wholesome family couples I've ever met, right? Like, straights can take a couple of lessons from them, I'm just saying. You know, around affection and love, because it's not just surface. It's not the sum of our body parts. It's not whether I've had top surgery or bottom surgery, or if I've been on hormones for X amount of time, or I stop, or I go back. That doesn't mean you're not trans, or that you regret what you did, right? It means that your understanding of your authenticity was in flux and it took time. Exactly. And one of the reasons why this takes so much time for us queer people is because there's a lot of hate out there still. It's one thing to have questions, it's another to assume, and also assume the worst, right? That, again, that we're preying on kids, that we're doing these things to our own bodies when we're 11, and all of these kind of fears. And that's why I kind of wanted you guys to kind of be here with me today to kind of dispel some of those fears, to see normal LGBT couples who just live in Fall River, right? Who are part of the queer community, who are part of the Fall River Pride Committee, right? Who are doing these kind of things, again, to show other younger queer adults as they come up that they can figure it out one step at a time, that they don't have to be put in any sort of boxes. So in the last couple of minutes here, do you guys have, what advice would you give to maybe some of the younger kids who might be watching this, who might be having issues with their family or feeling impatient, like they can't wait till they're 18 so they can start their own life? What advice would you give to them?
One thing I would like to add is just I feel like a big part of my transition has been coming to just love myself and my body as is, because I feel like there's so much pressure on hating your body and being trans, and like you don't have to hate yourself, and even if you do, like it's worth looking into why you feel that way, because a lot of the time it's external sources.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Final thoughts there, my love?
I completely agree with you. My advice would be to... Sorry.
It's okay.
Look inward, love yourself, ignore other people, even though it's hard, I know. Try to find those resources, those people, that they can be there for you. They can give you the support you need. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of happiness. You deserve to live your life the way that you want to, as long as you're not hurting anybody.
Yeah. And my final bits here too is that if you want to look at your body and change things, do that for you, and figure that stuff out one step at a time. Friends or family who tell you you should be or do things in a certain way are not being nearly as supportive as I think they're being. They might be thinking, oh, well, if I push them to this, they'll be more happy. But I found anyone who's ever tried to push me, maybe it's just the stubborn Leo in me, that didn't work. I had to figure it out for me. I had to learn to like my chunky body just the way it is, right? I had to figure out what kind of aesthetics, what kind of things that I liked to do for me. And the final cliche here I really will use is it does get better the more you work on your patience of it all. Because it takes time to get to that comfort level. I'm in my 30s and I'm like still barely figuring it out, right? But I've found enough of love and support and community where I've been able to kind of find these things about myself and love those things about myself. And the things that I hate about myself, I can still love to work on, right? That I get the opportunity to work on and kind of do those things and be in that sort of way. So I just want to thank you guys so much for being here, for letting me poke around your stories and your transitions, your relationship, throw it all under some lights and talk about it on YouTube, you know. And I do just want to kind of end here too, where we have, if you're looking for support, you're looking for communities, we're all part of the Fall River Pride Committee, where we meet over at 45 Rock Street at Recreation, where we are creating safe spaces at Recreation. So we're going to have all sorts of upcoming programming, but this coming Thursday, August 18th at 6:30 p.m. At 45 Rock Street, we have our general meeting where we'll have a little social, talk about some of our upcoming events and groups, and we would love to have you join us there. You can meet me in real life person, not just behind a screen. You can meet us in real life, my friends here in real life too, and have an incredible time just kind of getting to know your community, getting to know yourselves as we continue to talk about the gays of our lives. Thank you so much. Mwah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yay!